Hey guys, welcome back to The Readers. I hope you are having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first one is an entitled people story.
How far would you go to protect your home? When my neighbor broke into our house, started canceling our contractors, and claimed she was the rightful owner, I knew I had to do something drastic. The security camera footage we captured is insane, but it's what she did after the restraining order that will truly shock you.
I need to tell you about the most insane situation I've ever dealt with involving a neighbor. This whole nightmare lasted about a year and a half from start to finish, and even now, a few years later, it still blows my mind when I think about it. We closed on our house in early spring. It was a foreclosure property that had been sitting empty for about 8 months before we bought it. The house needed some work, but the bones were good and the price was right. We got a great deal on it because most people didn't want to deal with the renovations. My wife and I were excited because this was our first real home together. We had been renting apartments for years and finally saved up enough for a down payment. The house is in a decent suburban neighborhood with tree-lined streets and modest single-family homes. Most of the houses were built in the 70s and 80s. Our neighbors seemed friendly enough when we first visited the property. People waved when they drove by, and a few folks introduced themselves during our inspection visits. There was one neighbor, though, who seemed overly interested in our purchase. Her name was Susan, and she lived in the house directly next to ours. The first time I met her was when my wife and I were doing a final walkthrough before closing. Susan came right up to us in the driveway and introduced herself. She seemed nice at first. She told us she had lived in the neighborhood for over 20 years and knew everyone. She asked a lot of questions about our plans for the house and when we'd be moving in. Looking back now, I can see the red flags, but at the time I just thought she was being neighborly. She kept mentioning how she had been keeping an eye on the house while it was empty. She said she had been mowing the lawn and picking up debris so the property wouldn't bring down the neighborhood. She made a point of telling me several times that she had a key to the house that the previous owners had given her years ago for emergencies. I thanked her for maintaining the lawn, but told her we'd be taking over all the property maintenance now. She got this weird look on her face, but smiled and said, of course. Then she said something that should have been a bigger warning sign. She told me that she had certain rights as a longtime resident of the neighborhood and that she hoped we would respect the community standards that had been established long before we arrived. I didn't really know what she meant by that, so I just nodded and said we'd be good neighbors. My wife and I went inside to finish our walkthrough and didn't think much more about it. We closed on the house without any issues. The sellers had already moved out of state months before the foreclosure finalized, so we never actually met them. We got the keys from our real estate agent at the closing. We were so excited we drove straight to the house afterwards just to walk through it again as the actual owners. We finally moved into the house about 6 weeks after closing. We had spent those weeks doing some basic renovations and repairs. We replaced the carpeting, painted most of the rooms, and updated some of the light fixtures. We hired contractors for the bigger jobs like replacing the water heater and fixing some electrical issues. Susan made her presence known during those renovation weeks. She would come over almost every day to check on our progress. At first, it seemed like she was just being friendly and curious. She would bring cookies or lemonade and chat with us while we worked. But then she started making comments about the work we were doing. She didn't like the paint colors we chose. She said they weren't appropriate for the neighborhood aesthetic. She complained that our contractors were parking in front of her house sometimes. She mentioned multiple times that there were neighborhood rules we needed to follow and that she would get us a copy of the regulations. I asked her if there was a homeowners association. She said no, but that there was a neighborhood committee that maintained standards. She said she was the coordinator. That seemed odd to me because our real estate agent and the title company never mentioned any HOA or neighborhood committee. Usually that kind of thing comes up during closing if it exists. I decided to look into it. I checked our closing documents and found nothing about any HOA or neighborhood association. I called our real estate agent and she confirmed there was no HOA in our neighborhood. I also checked with the county records office and they had no record of any neighborhood association with legal authority over our property. When I told Susan this, she got defensive. She insisted there was a neighborhood committee and that just because it wasn't official didn't mean it wasn't real. She said the longtime residents had an understanding about maintaining standards and that newcomers were expected to respect that. I told her politely that we would maintain our property well, but that we wouldn't be answering to any unofficial committee. She did not take that well. Her whole demeanor changed. She stopped smiling and got this cold look in her eyes. She told me I was making a mistake and that I would regret not cooperating with the neighborhood standards. Then she turned around and went back to her house. My wife and I talked about it that night. We agreed Susan was being weird, but we figured she would calm down once we were settled in and she saw we were good neighbors who kept up our property. We were wrong. The problem started almost immediately after we moved in. The first incident happened on our third night in the house. I woke up around 2 in the morning because I heard a noise downstairs. At first I thought I was imagining it, but then I heard it again. It sounded like someone was at our front door. My wife woke up too and we both listened. The doorknob was definitely rattling. Someone was trying to open our front door in the middle of the night. I grabbed my phone and crept to the front door as quietly as I could. I looked through the peephole. There was Susan standing on our front porch trying different keys in our lock. I could not believe what I was seeing. I watched her try 3 or 4 different keys. None of them worked. Our locks were the new ones that came with the house and apparently her old key didn't fit anymore. I called out through the door and asked her what the hell she was doing. She jumped back, clearly startled. She claimed she saw someone suspicious in our yard and was trying to check if our doors were locked for our safety. That excuse made 0 sense. Why would she be trying keys in our lock if she was checking if the door was locked? And why wouldn't she knock or ring the doorbell to warn us if she saw someone suspicious? I opened the door and demanded she give me whatever keys she had. Susan reluctantly went inside her house and came back with a single key. She handed it over with this smug look that made me think she probably had copies. I took the key and went home. My wife and I decided to re-key all our locks just to be safe. We called a locksmith that same day and had it done. It cost us almost $300, but we needed the peace of mind. A few days after that incident, a notice appeared taped to our front door. It was printed on official-looking letterhead that said Neighborhood Standards Committee at the top. The notice claimed that our property was in violation of multiple community regulations. It listed things like our lawn exceeding the maximum permitted height of 3 inches, our mailbox being painted the wrong shade of gray, weeds exceeding 2 inches in height visible in our side yard, and our garage door being left open for more than 30 minutes during daylight hours. Each violation had a specific regulation number listed, like NS47B or NS103A. At the bottom it stated we had 14 days to correct all violations or face fines starting at $500 per violation. The whole thing was obviously fake. Our lawn was perfectly fine. Our mailbox was the standard black metal one that came with the house and looked like every other mailbox on the street. The weeds in our side yard were minimal, nothing excessive. And yes, we sometimes left our garage door open during the day when we were working in the yard or going in and out frequently. That's completely normal. I knew this was Susan. I went next door and knocked on her door. She answered with this fake, innocent smile. I held up the notice and asked her if she sent it. She said yes, that as the neighborhood standards coordinator, it was her responsibility to inform residents of violations. I told her the notice was complete nonsense and that she had no legal authority to fine us for anything. She said the fines were real and enforceable through the neighborhood committee. I told her there was no neighborhood committee and that if she put another fake notice on our door, I would report her for harassment. She got angry and said I was being hostile and unreasonable. She said everyone else in the neighborhood followed the standards and we should too. I told her to leave us alone and went back home. I thought that would be the end of it. It was not. A week later, another notice appeared. This one was more specific. It stated that as per neighborhood standards, all residents must maintain their lawns to a height of no more than 3 inches, and that lawns must be mowed weekly during growing season. It demanded that I provide documentation of my lawn care schedule to the Neighborhood Standards Committee, which meant Susan. Now, I had been mowing our lawn every week and a half or so whenever it needed it, but Susan wanted documentation and a specific schedule. Fine, I'd give her exactly what she asked for. I went to the city planning office and pulled up all the actual municipal codes for our area. Turns out our city had very minimal lawn requirements. The grass just couldn't exceed 12 inches in height. That was it. No requirements about mowing schedules or providing documentation to anyone. I typed up a very formal letter to Susan's Neighborhood Standards Committee. In it, I stated that I was complying with her request for documentation of my lawn care schedule. I then outlined my new schedule. I would be maintaining my lawn to the maximum height permitted by law, which was 12 inches. I would be mowing it only when it approached that height. I included copies of the relevant city ordinances. I noted that since city code did not require me to provide lawn care documentation to any private parties, this would be the only communication she would receive on this matter. I sent this via certified mail so I'd have proof she received it. Then I stopped mowing our lawn regularly. I let it grow. It looked shaggy and unkempt, but it wasn't violating any actual laws. Every few weeks when it started approaching 12 inches, I'd mow it back down to about 6 inches. Then I'd let it grow again. Our lawn looked pretty rough compared to the manicured yards around us, but it was completely legal. Susan was furious. She left multiple notices demanding I mow more frequently. Each time I responded with a polite letter reminding her that I was in full compliance with all applicable laws and regulations, and that her committee had no legal authority to require anything beyond that. The thing is, Susan was obsessive about her own lawn. She mowed it twice a week and it always looked perfect. Our shaggy lawn right next door drove her absolutely crazy. I could see her staring at it from her windows. A couple times I caught her taking pictures of it, probably to use as evidence of violations. Other neighbors started asking if everything was okay. I explained that I was complying with Susan's demand for a documented lawn care schedule and that my schedule was in full compliance with city code. Most of them thought it was funny once they understood what was happening. A few of them quietly told me that Susan had been a busybody for years, and they were glad someone was finally standing up to her. Susan actually called the city on us multiple times to complain about our lawn height. Each time an inspector came out, measured with an actual ruler, and confirmed we were in compliance. After the third time this happened, the inspector told me off the record that he had informed Susan that if she filed another frivolous complaint, she could be fined for wasting city resources. I kept this up for about 2 months. Our lawn looked terrible and my wife wasn't thrilled about it, but she understood the point I was making. Susan had demanded I follow rules and provide documentation. I followed the only rules that actually mattered, provided her with documentation of exactly that, and it made her miserable to look at every single day. Finally, I went back to mowing regularly once I felt Susan had learned her lesson, but only after she had spent 2 months stewing about our lawn and learning that her fake authority meant nothing. But Susan's harassment didn't stop with the fake notices and lawn complaints. Things escalated significantly. She started calling city inspectors with complaints about our property. We had visits from the building inspector, the health department, code enforcement, and even animal control. Every single complaint was unfounded. The inspectors found nothing wrong with our property. One of them even apologized for having to bother us and mentioned that they had received multiple calls from the same address about our house. Susan also started contacting our contractors. We had hired a company to redo our back deck. The contractor called me one day, sounding confused. He said the homeowner had contacted him and canceled the job. I told him I had done no such thing. He said a woman called claiming to be the homeowner and said we no longer needed the work done. I explained the situation with Susan and told him to ignore any calls that didn't come from me or my wife directly. He understood but said it was really weird. The same thing happened with our landscaper and with a company we hired to clean our gutters. Susan was calling them pretending to be us or claiming to be the actual owner of the property and trying to cancel our work. It was insane. I had to call each company and explain the situation and give them explicit instructions to only take direction from my cell phone number or my wife's number. Around noon one Saturday, my wife came running into the backyard looking upset. She told me Susan was in our house. I ran inside and found Susan in our living room taking pictures with her phone. I yelled at her asking what the hell she was doing in our house. She jumped and tried to act like she had a right to be there. She said she was documenting violations for her report. I told her she was trespassing and needed to leave immediately or I was calling the police. She said she had every right to be there for inspection purposes. I told her she had no such right and to get out. She finally left but walked out slowly like she was in no hurry, still taking pictures as she went. After she left, my wife and I checked the whole house to make sure nothing was missing. Everything seemed to be there, but it was violating and creepy to know she had been walking around inside our home. We checked the front door lock. There were fresh scratches around the keyhole. Susan had picked our lock or used some kind of tool to force it open. We had rekeyed the locks, but apparently that didn't stop her from getting in with lockpicking tools or something else. That was the final straw. We called the police and filed a report for breaking and entering. The officer who responded was professional and took our statement. He went next door to talk to Susan. She apparently admitted to entering our house, but claimed she had permission because she was conducting a neighborhood standards inspection. The officer explained to her that no such thing existed and that she had committed trespassing at minimum. Susan was not arrested that day, but the officer told us we could pursue charges if we wanted. He also suggested we get security cameras. We took his advice. That same day, we ordered a home security system with cameras covering our front door, back door, driveway, and backyard. The cameras recorded continuously and sent motion alerts to our phones. The cameras turned out to be a very good investment. Over the next few weeks, we caught Susan on camera multiple times approaching our property. She would walk through our yard, come up onto our porch, and peer into our windows. One time, the camera caught her trying our doorknob again to see if it was unlocked. Another time, she was in our backyard looking into our garage windows. We saved all the footage. We also started documenting every interaction with Susan and every fake notice she left. We created a folder with printed screenshots from the cameras, copies of all her fake violation notices, records of the canceled contractor appointments, and statements from the contractors confirming Susan had contacted them. Things got worse before they got better. Susan started telling people she owned our house. I didn't know this was happening at first. I found out when a neighbor down the street mentioned something to me about our rental situation. I was confused and asked him what he meant. He said Susan had told several people that she was the actual owner of our house. She was claiming that we were renters who were causing problems and that she was trying to evict us. I was floored. I told the neighbor that was completely false and that we owned the house outright, that we had bought it through a normal sale and had the deed and mortgage to prove it. He believed me, but said Susan had been very convincing and had even shown people what she claimed was the deed to our property. I have no idea where she got a fake deed or if she just showed people some random document and claimed it was the deed. This rumor got around the neighborhood pretty quickly. My wife and I had to have awkward conversations with several neighbors explaining that no, we were not renters, yes, we actually owned our home, and no, Susan did not own our property. Most people believed us, but some seemed uncertain. It was humiliating having to defend our legitimate ownership of our own home. The most outrageous incident happened on a Saturday morning about 4 months after we moved in. We woke up around 8 to motion alerts going crazy on our phones. I pulled up the camera app and saw Susan had set up tables in our driveway and was selling stuff. When we went outside to confront her, there were already a few people browsing her items. Susan had set up a full yard sale in our driveway. She had tables covered with household items, books, clothes, and other random stuff. She had even put up signs on the street directing people to the sale at our address. When I asked her what she thought she was doing, she announced loudly that she was the homeowner and was having a moving sale. She said this in front of the customers who were there shopping. I told everyone there that Susan was lying, that this was our property, and that she was trespassing. I told them they needed to leave and take their stuff with them. Susan started arguing with me in front of these people, insisting she owned the house. It was a whole scene. The customers got uncomfortable and left quickly. Susan finally packed up her stuff and went home, but not before telling me I would regret interfering with her sale. That same day, she posted a long rant on a neighborhood social media group claiming we had stolen her house through some kind of fraud. She posted that she was the rightful owner and that she was seeking legal remedies to reclaim her property. Several neighbors who knew the truth responded to her post saying she was lying and that we were the legitimate owners. The argument in the comments section went on for hours. Eventually, the group moderator deleted her post and told her to stop spreading false information. At this point, my wife and I decided we needed legal help. We consulted with a lawyer who specialized in property disputes and harassment cases. We showed him all our documentation. He reviewed everything and told us we had a very strong case. He said Susan's behavior constituted harassment, trespassing, defamation, and possibly stalking, depending on how the local statutes defined it. Our lawyer sent Susan a cease and desist letter. It outlined all her behaviors that were illegal and demanded she stop immediately. It stated that if she continued, we would pursue legal action, including a restraining order and a civil lawsuit for damages. The letter was sent via certified mail with return receipt so we would have proof she received it. Susan ignored the letter completely. In fact, her behavior got worse. She started parking her car in our driveway, just pulling in and parking there like it was her spot. The first time it happened, I knocked on her door and told her to move her car. She refused. She said she could park wherever she wanted on her property. I told her it was not her property, and if she didn't move her car, I was calling the police. She eventually moved it, but the next day she did it again. We called the police each time. They would come out and make her move her car, but told us it was a civil matter and there wasn't much they could do beyond asking her to move. They suggested we pursue a restraining order if her harassment was ongoing. Our lawyer had already suggested the same thing. We filed for a temporary restraining order. We submitted all our evidence, including the camera footage, the fake notices, the contractor statements, records of the false inspector complaints, and witness statements from neighbors who had heard Susan claim she owned our house. The judge reviewed everything and granted the temporary restraining order. Susan was served with the order by a sheriff's deputy. This meant she had to stay away from us and our property until the full hearing. We had to wait about 3 weeks for the hearing date. During that time, Susan actually complied with the order. We didn't see her or hear from her. It was the most peaceful 3 weeks we'd had since moving in. The hearing for the permanent restraining order took place at the county courthouse. My wife and I were there with our lawyer. Susan showed up without a lawyer representing herself. The judge asked us to present our case. Our lawyer did an excellent job laying out the timeline of Susan's harassment. He showed the camera footage of her trespassing, entering our home, and trying our doors. He presented the fake violation notices. He had statements from contractors. He had screenshots of her social media posts claiming she owned our house. He had statements from neighbors who had witnessed various incidents. The judge asked Susan if she wanted to respond. She went on this long, rambling explanation about how she had maintained the house while it was in foreclosure and how she had an understanding with the previous owners that they would sell it to her at a discount. She claimed we had swooped in and bought the house out from under her and that she was just trying to protect her interests. She insisted she had certain rights to the property because of all the work she had put into maintaining it while it was empty. The judge was not impressed. He pointed out that Susan had no legal claim to the property whatsoever. He said her supposed understanding with the previous owners meant nothing legally, and even if it had been a real agreement, which she had no proof of, it would have been nullified by the foreclosure. He told her that her behavior was not acceptable under any circumstances and that she had repeatedly violated our property rights and our personal safety. The judge granted the permanent restraining order. Susan had to stay away from us and our property at all times. She was not permitted to come onto our property, approach us in public, or contact us in any way. The judge specifically noted that while she could remain living in her own home, she was prohibited from being in our yard, on our porch, or anywhere on our property. If she saw us in public, she was required to leave the area immediately. Susan did not take it well. She started crying in the courtroom and saying it wasn't fair. The judge told her she had brought this on herself with her own actions, and that if she violated the order, she would be arrested. He also warned her that we could pursue criminal charges for her previous trespassing and breaking and entering if we chose to do so. After the hearing, we thought things would finally calm down, and they did for a while. Susan kept to herself. We would occasionally see her coming and going from her house, but she stayed away from us. We kept our security cameras running just in case. Then about 6 weeks after the restraining order was granted, Susan violated it. Our cameras caught her walking through our backyard at night. The motion alerts woke us up and we watched on our phones as she walked around our yard, looking in our windows. We called the police immediately and sent them the footage while we stayed on the phone. The police arrived quickly. They found Susan in her own yard by that point, but we showed them the camera footage with timestamps showing she had been on our property just minutes before. Since we had a restraining order in place and video evidence of her violating it, the police arrested her right there. Susan was arrested for violating the restraining order. She spent a night in jail before her arraignment where she was released, but given a stern warning by a judge. She was told in no uncertain terms that if she violated the restraining order again, she would face more serious consequences, including potential jail time. After the arrest, Susan finally seemed to get the message. She stayed away from us and our property. We still saw her occasionally in her yard from a distance, but she kept to herself and didn't speak to us or approach us. However, we weren't done. Our lawyer advised us that we should file a civil lawsuit against Susan for all the harassment, the break-ins, the defamation from her false ownership claims, and all the costs we had incurred. This included the security cameras, rekeying our locks twice, legal fees, and the time we'd lost from work dealing with false inspector visits and all of Susan's nonsense. We filed the lawsuit about a month after Susan's arrest. The case took nearly 8 months to work through the system. Susan represented herself, which our lawyer said was a huge mistake on her part. She filed a counterclaim alleging that we had somehow defrauded her out of the house, claiming again that the previous owners had promised to sell to her. Her counterclaim was quickly dismissed as having no legal basis whatsoever. She couldn't produce any contract or written agreement or any real evidence of this supposed promise. As the case progressed and it became clear Susan was going to lose, she agreed to settle. The settlement required Susan to pay us an amount that covered most of our documented costs, though not the full amount we'd asked for. She also had to sign a statement acknowledging that we were the sole legal owners of our property and that she had no claim to it whatsoever. The settlement included provisions that if she ever violated the restraining order or harassed us again, we could take her back to court, and the penalties would be much more severe. About 4 months after the settlement, we noticed Susan had put her house up for sale. We heard through neighbors that she was having financial problems and that between the settlement payment and her legal costs from representing herself, she was struggling. The house sold after a few months on the market, and Susan moved away. We never found out where she went, and we didn't care. We were just relieved she was gone. The malicious compliance part of all this was when Susan demanded I follow her fake neighborhood committee rules and provide documentation of my lawn care schedule. She wanted me to comply with her made-up authority. So I complied, just not the way she wanted. I followed the actual city ordinances to the letter and let my lawn grow to the maximum legal height. I provided her with full documentation showing I was in complete compliance with all applicable laws. She demanded compliance and documentation, and that's exactly what she got. It drove her absolutely crazy for 2 months having to look at our shaggy lawn every single day, while being unable to do anything about it because I was following the only rules that actually mattered. She had tried to control us with fake rules and instead ended up learning that her fake authority meant absolutely nothing. Our house is peaceful now. We've finished all our renovation projects and have been living here for 3 years since Susan moved away. The whole ordeal from when we first moved in to when she finally left lasted about 18 months total. We have good relationships with all our other neighbors, most of whom were sympathetic about what we went through with Susan. A couple of them even told us they were glad we stood up to her because she had been a problem in the neighborhood for years, but no one had ever taken legal action before. They said she had harassed other people too, but never to the extent she harassed us. The new neighbors who bought Susan's house are wonderful. They're a retired couple who keep to themselves and are perfectly pleasant when we run into them. We told them a brief version of what happened with Susan, and they were shocked. They said they would never behave that way and just wanted a quiet place to enjoy their retirement. We still have the security cameras up and running. After everything we went through, we feel better having them. They've come in handy a few times for normal reasons like checking on package deliveries or seeing what time we left the house for something. But mostly they just give us peace of mind. Looking back on the whole situation, it's hard to believe it actually happened. The fact that someone could be that entitled and delusional is mind-blowing. Susan genuinely seemed to believe she had some claim to our house just because she had maintained the lawn while it was in foreclosure. She created an entire fake neighborhood committee and tried to enforce made-up rules. She broke into our house multiple times. She told everyone she was the real owner. She held a yard sale in our driveway. All of this because she couldn't accept that we had legally purchased a house she thought should have been hers. The scary part is that if we hadn't documented everything and pursued legal action, who knows how long she would have kept harassing us. Some people just don't stop until they face real consequences. Susan faced consequences in the form of a restraining order, an arrest, a civil lawsuit settlement, and ultimately having to move away from her home of 20 years. I hope she learned something from all this, but honestly I doubt it. People like Susan rarely take responsibility for their own actions. She probably still believes she was somehow the victim in this situation, but that's not our problem anymore. She's gone and we can finally enjoy our home in peace without worrying about what insane thing she might do next. If there's any lesson from this whole nightmare, it's to document everything when you're dealing with a problem neighbor. The camera footage and written records we kept were essential to getting the restraining order and winning the civil case. Without that documentation, it would have been much harder to prove what was happening. Also, don't be afraid to pursue legal action when someone is harassing you. We tried to handle things reasonably at first, but Susan wasn't reasonable. Sometimes you have to use the legal system to protect yourself and your property. We love our house and we're glad we stuck it out instead of selling and moving away, which we considered doing at one point during the worst of Susan's harassment. This is our home and we weren't going to let someone else drive us out of it. It took time, money, and stress to resolve the situation, but it was worth it in the end. Now we can enjoy the house we worked hard to buy and renovate without having to deal with an unhinged neighbor claiming she owns it. The next one is an entitled people story. This happened over a decade ago in the northeastern United States. When I was in my senior year of high school, a combination of depression and CPTSD caused me to miss school a lot. I rarely left the house at all, but school was especially difficult. My psychiatrist wrote a letter explaining that my absences were due to medical issues rather than truancy, and my mother worked with her and with the school so that I could still graduate. On one of the increasingly rare days when I managed to go in, Betty, which is a fake name, called me into her office. I do not remember her exact title, but her job was similar to that of a vice principal. The school had around 1,600 students, so it was divided into 4 sections. Each section had its own office, pseudo-principal, and pseudo-vice principals, in addition to the overall school administration, which had its own principal and 2 vice principals. It was the only high school in a well-off district, so I think they set it up that way because they did not want students to get lost in the crowd. Betty sat me down, brought up my absences, and told me she was going to give me detention for them. I started crying and tried to explain that the absences were for medical reasons, but she was firm. With her permission, I called my mother. My mother was livid. She said something like, "I'm going to take care of this, sweetie, but you are not having detention. It is not going to happen." By that point, I was just sobbing continuously and apologizing to everyone who came near me. At that age, I was in a constant fog of despair and self-hatred, but I usually tried to hide it. Under other circumstances, it might have been good for me to cry and let some of it out. At one point, Betty left the room to talk to people. When she came back, she had already started backtracking. She gave me a tissue box and told me she was just trying to help me. Then she told me that other students had been talking about me behind my back. Apparently, they had been asking why I was getting away with being absent so much. She said the detention was just meant to get them to stop talking about it. Eventually, she even said it was not really detention. She just wanted to spend some time with me. But she had already been very clear on the phone with my mother, and I think with the secretary too, that it was detention for my medical absences. It was too late for her to sweep it under the rug. My mother came and picked me up. I am sorry to say that I do not know exactly what happened next. My mother is a very nice, sweet person, and like many nice, sweet people, once she is finally pushed too far, she becomes someone you do not want to cross. I think she was trying to shelter me from the details because my emotional state was already fragile even before this happened. All I know is that Betty was forced to retire a few months later. On the bright side, the school suddenly decided that for the next semester, they were perfectly happy to pay for a home tutor to come help me take my classes from home. I never had to go in again. After Betty's little stunt, they were falling all over themselves to accommodate me, and I was actually able to graduate on time. Strangely, I think I became a little more stable after I recovered from the actual incident. I had believed all along that I deserved to be punished and that my psychiatrist and mother were just being nice to me because I was pathetic. But when Betty tried to punish me, everyone came down on her like a ton of bricks, rightly so. It made me feel like there might be some truth to what my psychiatrist and mother had been telling me, that my illness was not my fault. It was good to feel protected, too. I did not get that feeling often. The bizarre thing is that Betty was actually very popular with many students. In hindsight, I wonder if that was because she tried hard to make them like her. I transferred to that school during junior year, so I was not there long enough to fully understand what was going on. Maybe she was too attached to her image as a cool teacher and wanted to keep the popular kids happy. Or maybe it was a cowardly attempt to deflect blame for her actions onto students. Maybe it was both. Anyway, thank you for watching.